Hello everyone and welcome back to another instalment of the Warwick F1 Show. We are now firmly in the downtime, the off-season after what has been an incredible 2024 season. And in this episode we thought we would focus specifically on the drivers and think who has really been the best, who has been the worst, everything in between of all of the drivers in the last season. I am your host Callum and I'm joined once again by Chinmay and returning guest James as well. Thank you both very much for joining me today. So essentially what we've done is we've gone away and we've ranked all the drivers that have completed the entire season of F1, plus Ocon, because he did. We understand he did complete most of the season. It was only the last race in Abu Dhabi that he missed out on, being replaced obviously by Jack Doohan. So all 18 drivers, including Ocon, that have completed the entire season, and we've ranked them best to worst, forgetting about the quality of the cars, just on the entire performance of the drivers throughout the entire season. And yeah, we're just going to go through and compare our lists. So we'll go for the top 5 first and running through our order. Chinmay, if I come to you first, so what is your top 5? I'm guessing that we'll probably agree on the first place driver, but I think the second, third, fourth, and fifth might be quite interesting, and we might have some different answers.
Yeah, I think it goes without saying that the first place is Max Verstappen. Even though, yes, he had a fantastic start to the season, the Red Bull was the fastest car, but it quickly fell off. And, just the way he was able to just drive that car despite all the issues. And, especially that testament to that drive in Brazil, starting and winning from 17th is just the definition of just how good of a driver he really has become in the last few years. And I think it's definitely his best title win of the 4 that he's won, and obviously, and by far the least controversial. So, it's I think there is it's a no-brainer that he is the best driver of the season. I guess the second place might throw off a couple people because you probably might expect me to put Norris second for, again, a very good season himself. But I've actually put Charles Leclerc in second place over Lando.
Interesting. Okay.
Because in reality, Leclerc was never really a championship threat. But he didn't finish far behind Norris, and obviously he winning at home in Monaco, winning at Monza, and winning the United States Grand Prix, and probably one of the most consistent drivers of the season. And I feel like across the whole season he was faster than Sainz, and I think he was the driver who probably extracted the most out of his car other than Verstappen, one of those drivers. So I just think on consistency alone I would put Charles Leclerc over Lando Norris. Obviously third place would go to Norris because of the fact that I think the biggest thing that puts him down is just, like I said, there were races where he should have won, such as like Austria he probably could have won, and then he threw away somewhere places like Qatar when he didn't spot those yellow flags. And obviously he's still learning, but especially like wheel-to-wheel combat, he's not the same level as drivers like Verstappen. He still needs to learn that. So, and at least at least one thing, I can openly slander Norris without opposition today, which is quite nice.
Catch is not joining us, so we can happily talk about Norris as much.
No, but yes, he's had a fantastic season, and obviously he deserves to be second place. But I feel like he could have done a bit more this season. But then again, it was not always his fault. It could have been McLaren's fault. A lot of the time it was McLaren's fault as well, because it's the same sort of situation. The constructors obviously deserve to win the constructors first time since 1998. So yeah, fourth place I've actually put Carlos Sainz just because of the sheer consistency he's put out, and his his run at the beginning of the season, especially his win in Australia, stands out for me. He had a very impressive first half of the season. Obviously, there was the occasional bad weekend, especially Canada. I'm thinking Azerbaijan as well. And obviously being the second best. But then again, bringing Ferrari to within 14 points of the constructors, I think and I just think he's just been extremely lucky to be booted out Ferrari when at this level of his career. And then that leads me to put fifth place in George Russell, even though he's had a lot of up and down performances, not compared to his teammate. Firstly, beating Lewis Hamilton in qualifying over the same season in the same car is a thing to withhold on its own, considering that Lewis Hamilton's probably he's got the most pole positions of anyone in history, in F1 history, obviously, and he's picked up a couple of fantastic wins as well, especially Belgium and Las Vegas. And he was unfortunate to lose victory, I think, was in Spa as well. There's a lot less mistakes compared to last year as well, but then it is what it is. I've just felt that the consistency puts him below Sainz, but yeah, that's my top 5. So
that's very interesting. There's a few very interesting cases there. No mention of Piastri, which I realised. So Piastri's, I'm guessing,
spoiler, he's sick.
He's sick. Okay, right. So, but still not in the top 5. And also, I'm very much questioning. So I've gone something completely different. I'm very surprised that you didn't put Hülkenberg in the top 5, because I'm actually going to be very bold. So I'm going to do. I've gone with the same top 2 as you, so Verstappen and Leclerc, and then I've actually put Hülkenberg for 3rd, and it might be quite a bit of a surprise to people. I mean, I was debating between Hülkenberg and Norris for 3rd place, and I think just Norris, we've realised a lot more mistakes from this year. Obviously, there's been some really great races, as we mentioned before, that Norris has completely dominated, and he's really shown his potential in that car. But Hülkenberg, I think the consistency just really stands out for me. It seems like a little bit like Verstappen, not to the degree, but just the fact that he's been able to get the most out of that car, even when that car hasn't been that good. The amount of points finishes, the amounts of 11th places that we've talked about so much in the season, I think he's just been phenomenal. Norris is then 4th, and then I've actually gone with Piastri 5th. I've talked a lot about Piastri on this podcast, especially in relation to the Constructors' Championship, because I think he has been the revelation when it comes to McLaren's win of the Constructors. Definitely the reason why they were able to get it this year, because they had, I think, one of the best second drivers on the grid. And even though I feel like he is obviously a bit lower down compared to some of the other drivers up there, because I feel like there were some races, maybe come the end of the season, where he wasn't quite on it, there's still some races where he showed some brilliant performances, I think, and I think he really deserves a lot of credit for that. So that's mine and Chinmay's top 5. Had some similar drivers, Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, as you can expect. James, is that something that is similar to your top 5, or have you gone for something that's completely different?
Mine is very similar to Chinmay's, actually. So number 1, I've got Verstappen, unsurprisingly. Yeah, he's just a class above everyone else. I mean, we can see how he compares to Perez in the same car. It's to win the championship in the car, which was probably the 3rd fastest for most of the year. He was so consistent. He won races against the odds, like in the rain in Canada and Brazil, on days when the Red Bull wasn't the fastest car, in places like Spain and Qatar. His racecraft is just above anyone else's. He's just so good, Verstappen. And he is a deserved 4-time world champion. So in second, I've also gone for Leclerc. I think he had a really good season. He was really consistent. He barely made any major errors, which is compared to some of his previous years where he's made quite a lot of errors. I think maybe he wasn't quite as quick over one lap as in past years, and his sights qualified him 9 times, but he was certainly more consistent on a Sunday. And he finished in the top. If you exclude that 4-race run from Canada to Britain where Leclerc and Ferrari were nowhere, if you take out those 4 races, then Leclerc was in the podium, was on the top 5 at every race, and would have finished just 8 points behind Verstappen if you take out those 4 races, that 4-race run. See how good Leclerc's season was. So really, he wasn't that far off being a championship contender. 3rd, I've gone for Norris as well. Norris had a good season, but he's just not quite at the level to challenge for a world championship yet. His starts were too poor when losing the lead from pole way too often certainly cost him the victory in Spain and Hungary, may have done in Monza and Brazil but yeah, his starts weren't quite up there. I don't think his race class quite there, but at the same time, he was comfortably quicker than Piastri over the course of the season, and Piastri's a seriously good driver, but he was extremely quick. He qualified Piastri 20-4. In the second half of the season, he was a long way ahead. He is capable of dominating races. He needs to show that he can win races not from the front, but overall, it was still a good season from him, just not quite at World Championship level. Fourth, I've gone for Russell. It's pretty outstanding to beat Lewis Hamilton, who's won the most races of all time, a seven-time world champion in the same car. To qualify in 19.5 over the course of the season is amazing. Yet it wasn't that consistent, but how much of that is the Mercedes car being rather inconsistent and how much is Russell's fault? I don't know. But overall, it was a very good season. The 2 wins in Austria and Vegas, should have had a third in Spa, was he not disqualified for technical infringement. So a very good season for him. In fifth, I've gone for Carlos Sainz. I thought this was actually Sainz's strongest season at Ferrari. He outqualified Leclerc 9 times. There were weekends when he was generally quicker than Leclerc, like Australia, Japan, Mexico, obviously Austria, Britain. Obviously, he took those 2 wins in Australia and Mexico. Australia just after having his appendix out. Both pretty dominant wins. The only things pulling him down were overall Leclerc was quicker over the season. And there were a few errors along the way. Crashing out in Canada and Brazil. The collision with Perez in Baku. And crashing out of quali in Singapore. Pulls him down a bit. But overall, I've got him 5th. It was a very strong season. It's a shame that he's leaving a top team, particularly since I've ranked him ahead of the driver he's replacing him.
Yeah, certainly. It's a very similar top 5 as you mentioned to Chinmay. We mentioned Charles Leclerc. I think that he certainly deserves a lot more credit to what he has been. He's been an absolute phenomenal driver, as we've already mentioned this season. And extension then Sainz, the fact that Sainz is as near as he is to Leclerc is just a credit to him. And I think he certainly deserves to be in a top team, even though it's unfortunate that he's obviously not going to be in one probably for the 2025 season. He's certainly a driver that deserves to be on the F1 grid because he can really deliver on his day, like in Australia, like in Mexico, like we mentioned. So we'll go into our 6 to 10 places now, and I think this is where we'll probably see a few more of those standout midfield drivers that maybe weren't featured in our top 5. I'll go through mine first. So 6th, I've actually gone with Gasly. Now, Gasly, I hope for you guys as well, is up there. I understand that maybe he might have not taken too much notice for the top 5, but I just think when it came to the latter stages of the season, he was absolutely phenomenal, and he is undoubtedly the reason why Alpine were able to get 6th in the Constructors after what was a horrendous start to the season for them. And he's just been incredible, delivered some great performances. Consistently as well, I should say, throughout as I mentioned, the last stage of the season. 7th, I've gone with Russell as well. So I've actually put Gasly ahead of Russell and Sainz, which I think is quite bold perhaps, but I just think that Russell and Sainz were maybe delivering just above what they were expected of them, but Gasly went above and beyond, which is why I felt the need to put Gasly in 6th ahead of those two. Russell then in 7th and Sainz in 8th. Russell, I think, was just slightly better than Sainz. I can just think of 1 or 2 moments where he was really a standout, and especially I think the Mercedes car wasn't as good as the Ferrari. Well, clearly wasn't as good as the Ferrari this season. But Russell was still able to get up there fighting with the top 3 teams as well. And so that's why I put Russell ahead of Sainz. 9th, I've gone with Hamilton. There was a bit of a recency bias here because I understand that he had some really dreadful performances in the latter stages of the season. I'm thinking his Q1 exits that we've seen this season as well. But I think earlier in the season, and especially that Silverstone performance, was really great. And then in 10th, I've gone with Alonso, actually. So really getting into some of the midfield teams now. I think Alonso has gone under the radar a bit, mainly because the Aston Martin car this season was dreadful. But I think just the fact that he was able to get some consistent performances and some consistent points in when that Aston Martin car hasn't been performing. And especially because of the goal to his teammate, who is, as you can imagine, is right down the bottom of this list. So, yeah, 6th Gasly, 7th Russell, 8th Sainz, Hamilton in 9th, and then Alonso in 10th. James, if you wanted to go through your 6 to 10 places now, what have you gone for?
In 6th, I've gone for Piastri. He had a good year. He put some outstanding performances. I mean, that win in Baku was outstanding, catching Leclerc napping after the pit stop and then holding him behind for the rest of the race. One in Hungary as well. Just the thing which holds him back a bit, my ranking, is overall over the course of the season, he didn't quite have the speed Norris did. I mean, Norris out-qualified him 24 over the course of the season. Apart from when Norris got lucky with the yellow flags in Baku, Piastri hasn't out-qualified him since Monaco. In weekends, when he went a bit missing, he didn't have a very good finish to the season at all. He was really a long way behind Norris in the last 6 races or so. And a very strong middle of the season. But he's still developing. He's only his 2nd season. And for a driver in just his 2nd season, he's outstanding how few crashes he's had. I mean, when you think of any significant crashes he's had. And of course, he became just the 4th driver ever to complete every lap in a season. The 3 previous ones had all won the World Championship those years. So it's outstanding. But he just doesn't have the pace or consistency of Norris yet. But he's still young. 7th, I've got on for Fernando Alonso. I think he had a really good season, actually. He didn't have the best start to the season. He was quite close to Stroll. But then as the season went on and the Aston Martin struggled, he got better. It is quite hard to judge him because he's only got Lance Stroll as a teammate, and the Aston Martin car seems a bit all over the place. But I mean, Stroll made him reasonably favourable against Vettel, so I think Alonso is still very good. He's consistent, so I'll put him 7th. 8th, I've gone for Nico Hülkenberg. Yeah, again, he had a very good year. He was very consistent, and some of his qualifying performances are outstanding. Very consistent in the midfield car. The only thing which holds him back a bit in my rankings is I think you need to be careful not to overrate the midfield drivers. At the end of the day, the ones at the top of the grid do tend to be better. People forget that in the midfield, yes, you got a worse car in the midfield, but you're also only competing against more middle of the grid drivers like Gasly, Tsunoda, Ocon, Stroll, Magnussen, and instead of, well, if you're running at the front of the grid, you've got to compete against the likes of Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris, Hamilton. So I think, I mean, people rated Perez very highly in the midfield, and he's really struggled in the top car, so you'd be careful not to overrate midfield drivers. And also, the other thing which holds him back a bit is the 2 times he was up against Behrman, a rookie, he was behind Behrman, both in qualifying and the race on both occasions, so that's a complete rookie. He didn't even have a great year in F2, so that's why I've only put Hülkenberg 8th. In 9th, I've gone for Lewis Hamilton. He didn't have a brilliant last year at Mercedes, not quite the Hamilton of old, but at the same time, there were signs that's still there. I mean, winning in Silverstone and Spa, yes, he got a bit lucky with Russell getting disqualified in Spa, but he was ahead round up for the strategy anyway. There were some races which weren't so great, particularly being out-qualified 19.5 by Russell was not good, and then some uncharacteristic errors like spinning out in Austin. But then, at the same time, even at the end of the season, we saw flashes of what's still there. I mean, Abu Dhabi coming from 17th on the grid to finish 4th, beating Russell. Vegas, had he not messed up qualifying, he would have won the race there, charting from 10th to 2nd. So besides the old Hamilton still there, but not quite at the top level this year. 10th, I've gone for Gasly. Overall, across the course of the season, he was fairly equal with Ocon, but he had a superb finish to the season. It was on the form of his life at the end of the season. 3rd place in Brazil, qualifying 3rd in Vegas, 5th in Qatar, and then running 3rd for Ryan Abu Dhabi, and finishing, I think, 6th or something. So he had a superb finish to the season. It ultimately got Alpine 6th in the Constructors. I mean, the team was kind of becoming his at the end of the season with Ocon going, but if we continue that form into next year, then it could be really good for him at Alpine. It's just over the start of the year wasn't quite so good when the Alpine was bad, and he was pretty much equal to Ocon over the course of the season.
So interesting. You actually think that Ocon and Gasly were equal in the first stage of the season, which is quite interesting to me because clearly Alpine, I think, did favour Gasly come the end of the season. So James, do you think that maybe that's because Was it just on their performances at the end when Ocon started to drop off, or do you think that maybe it was? Do you think it was maybe more internal affairs in the team, which was the reason why Ocon was dropped by Alpine? Because as you mentioned, you think that they were quite equal in terms of performances, at least for the large majority of the season.
Over the course of the season, they're pretty much equal. I mean, Ocon qualified Gasly 11-10 over the course of the season, which has come to be the closest on the grid. It'd probably been 11-all, given Gasly qualified 5th in Abu Dhabi and Ocon not being dropped. But again, I mean, the car was unreliable and slow in the early part of the season, but they seem pretty equal if you look at the race results, how often they finished ahead of each other. It was only the end of the season when Gasly really pulled clear. And yes, Ocon was on the way out then. He don't know how much was it. Also, Gasly in really good form at the end of the season. But over the course of the season, they were fairly similar apart from the last few races.
That is a good point. I suppose that with Gasly, at least, I guess he really came into his own at the end of the season, and that just happened to coincide with when Alpine, as the car, really came into its own as well, and really started to show improvements, which is maybe, I suppose, why Gasly's performances have seemed to be a lot better than Ocon's, and especially because of recency bias as well. But yeah, and also you mentioned that Alonso putting ahead of Hülkenberg, and I do suppose it's difficult to judge. We're getting to the stage now near the end of the grid where it's becoming more difficult to judge the drivers because it's very difficult to judge when the car is as bad as it is. And I think definitely with the Aston Martin car, with how poor it's been a lot of races this season, it's certainly hard to judge. Chinmay, what's your 6 to 10 places? What have you gone for?
Yeah, you're not going to like where I put Nico Hülkenberg, by the way, but I'll start.
Seriously, I'm so surprised that everyone has gone for Nico Hülkenberg so far now. I've raced him so much this season, but I don't know. Maybe I just like seeing him doing well in the house car, but who knows? Anyway, go for it.
Yeah, so I'll start with 6th place, Piastri, for the same reasons. I think, obviously it was a very solid second season. Obviously, he was slower than Norris on head-to-head on a single lap especially. And yes, he did have flashes of brilliance, but especially the second half of the season, he did start to become a lot more anonymous in general. And I felt he did underperform in that set bit of the season. But then again, we are seeing it's a good, solid improvement from the first season, which is what we want to see from a new driver. And to be honest, the way Piastri is driving, it doesn't feel like it's a second season. So yeah, the way he can only really go up from here at the moment. 7th, I have gone for Pierre Gasly because, yes, I will agree with James that there was a lot of similarity with Ocon in the first half of the season, but then I just think just how good the second half of the season was compared to Ocon. The fact that he was just so much quicker, it's even in the dry conditions, and he just did all the heavy lifting to get Alpine up to 6th place.
Yeah, I think we can certainly all agree that he is probably the reason that Alpine are as high as they are at the moment.
Yeah, and not just that as well. He being one of the few drivers to actually not cause any car damage at all in terms of
That's a good point. We haven't spoken about that yet. Actually, that he's caused. Given that we're going to be talking about certain Williams drivers a bit later on, we should definitely mention that.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think that's what it is. 8th place, I've actually got Fernando Alonso.
Interesting. Okay.
I have gone Fernando Alonso. Of course, he didn't finish higher than 5th all season. But then the Aston Martin fell off really quickly and was not competitive throughout most of the season. In fact, it got a lot more harder as it went on. But then Alonso's had a lot of solid drives, and even though I would say maybe the second quarter of the year, especially around Canada, he was a bit meh. But I think he just got it just seemed like he managed to get the most out of the package, and it'll be interesting to see how next year goes for him. Hopefully it does continue. He's still got it. At 43, he's still got it. I
think they are in dire need of Adrian Newey at the moment and some other help with their car. And I think all of us would love to see what Alonso is capable of. Yeah. Was it not the start of this season, but the start of last season, where the Aston Martin was like the second fastest car on the grid, and he really showed how good of a driver he was. And yeah, we'd all love to see that again.
So, 9th place, I think will go to Lewis Hamilton for me. Again, I think we've talked about it. He was out-qualified Russell quite significantly, and he's had quite the erratic season. He's just made life too difficult for himself with qualifying, and then he's made those mistakes. For example, spinning out in Texas. But then again, especially places like Silverstone, Spa, and Las Vegas, you just saw that old Hamilton come back, and you see his time management skills, his racecraft. When he showed up, he showed up. So I think, but just because of how erratic that season was and how poor he was at qualifying, especially, that just made life so much harder for him. And I think I just had to keep him all the way down in 9th. Which does mean Nico Hülkenberg is all the way down in 10th. It was a toss-up between Lewis Hamilton and Hülkenberg for 9th, but I just felt like the peaks of Hamilton was enough for me to justify putting above Nico Hülkenberg, because yes, Hülkenberg did do the heavy lifting for Haas, and I think he scored points 13 times and finished 11th 7 or something like that. So
he was very unlucky with the 11th places. I find it interesting that both you and James have put Hülkenberg below Alonso. I thought that Hülkenberg was going to be easily above Alonso.
For me, it was just the general second half of the season.
Yeah,
I think was just a bit underwhelming because the Haas and Aston Martin were fairly comparable for a large chunk of it in terms of race pace, I believe. And I just felt that Alonso showed a little bit more consistency. And to be honest as well, I think Alonso just managed to drag that car a lot better than Hülkenberg did. But that's just what I felt, to be honest.
Yeah, fair enough. Cool, right, so that is, Chinmay, that's your 6 to 10 places, thank you. We're now moving on to maybe some of the more, underwhelming drivers that we've seen for this season. We're getting into 11th to 15th place. James, if you wanted to run through yours first, what have you gone for 11th to 15th?
For number 11, I've gone for Yuki Tsunoda. I mean, he had a good year. He beat Ricciardo overall and ultimately ended Ricciardo's career. He showed up fairly well against Lawson. They didn't completely annihilate him, given Lawson's only done 5 races in F1. It was a solid year. It wasn't spectacular, its performances. We don't know quite how good, given how good we thought the RB was at the start of the season. It's a bit of a disappointment, but I don't know how much that's the car. Overall, it was a good year. He beat Ricciardo. He beat Lawson. He didn't annihilate them, though. It was still yelled at him, but you questioned in quali or whatever. But it's over. But it was good, but not outstanding, but solid. And it's a bit of a shame that he doesn't get a chance in the Red Bull compared to Lawson. But you can see why they make the decision they did. 12th, I've gone for Ocon. He was pretty close to Gasly across the course of the season. He just dropped off a bit towards the end, but we don't know what was going on behind the scenes. He ended up ultimately leaving the team with the race to go. And things like lunging up the inside of his teammate at Portier as well. That's stupid, but you don't know what was going on behind the scenes at Alpine. But he wasn't quite. Overall, he was fairly close, just dropped off a bit at the end to Gasly. 13th, I have gone. In 13th, I have gone for Alex Albon. Albon had a decent season, but maybe not quite as good as 2022 and 3. He came to be out-qualified Sargent. He out-qualified every race, he completely dominated him. But then he was but Colapinto was a lot closer. I mean, he out-qualified Albon twice, immediately came in and was reasonably close to Albon. He didn't dominate Colapinto. He was a pretty raw rookie, done half a year F2. And there were a few too many crashes, like, for a team which couldn't really afford them, like Australia, crashing in practice and forcing Sargent to miss the race. A big crash in Brazilian quali, although that might have been a car failure, not quite sure there. A few crashes in practice. But he didn't score that many points. He's got a reasonable number. It was a decent year, but not outstanding ultimately.
I think for me, Albon seemed like he seemed like he had quite an underwhelming season. But I suppose maybe, James, if you'd agree, it's because we've known him to be so good and go above and beyond in that Williams car.
Yeah, but it's hard to tell because that Williams maybe wasn't quite was only the ninth fastest. There weren't particularly many opportunities for the lower teams to score points this year, given the top 4 teams seem pretty consistent. And the Williams being probably the ninth fastest wasn't quite good enough to get points regularly. 14th, I've gone for Valtteri Bottas. Didn't have a bad year at all. It's hard to judge him because that Sauber was so bad. He pretty comfortably beat Joe. He was about 2-1 over the course of the season. Bit unfortunate to come 22nd in a 20-car championship. It wasn't outstanding. There were some bad races. It starts about brilliant. There was some bad races like Abu Dhabi taking out with Perez and Magnussen. Wasn't ideal, but it was overall a so-so year. 15th, I've gone for Kevin Magnussen. I don't think his season was as bad as people make out, actually. He still out-qualified Hulkenberg a few times, and Hulkenberg's a good driver. He still came 15th in the championship. He got quite a few points finishes. There were some great weekends, like Mexico, where he came 7th. He beat Piastri. It was very impressive. His starts were really good over the course of the season. He quite comfortably gained the most places of anyone on the first lap this year. He was actually a really good starter.
We should also mention as though with Magnussen though that he did get a race ban for all of his penalties.
There were a few too many incidents though, particularly at the start of the year. Some of them was about over defending with his teammate, but there were things like taking out Sargent in Miami, taking out Tsunoda in China. Yeah, quite a few incidents at the start of the year, and ultimately the race ban later on, and Behrman did pretty well compared to him when he jumped into his car. But at the same time, it was a decent year, not better than last year certainly for him, but yeah, a few too many incidents for him to be ranked any higher.
Yes, very good point. So some really good 11th to 15th there. As we mentioned, Albon being a driver who perhaps we expected to be a bit further up compared to previous years, and also Valtteri Bottas, which to be honest for me, I was quite unsure of where to actually put the Sauber cars because the Sauber car was so bad that it's difficult to judge any single driver's performance because it doesn't matter if you're an incredible driver or a terrible driver, you're not going to be able to get any performance out of that car. So interesting that you put Bottas in your 11th to 15th. I've actually gone with the other driver in my 11th to 15th. But Chinmay, if you wanted to go through your 11th to 15th next.
Yeah, sure. I will start with the same 11 places, James, with Yuki Tsunoda. I think just the fact that he was consistent, this was definitely his best season in F1 so far, and he saw the challenges from Ricciardo and Lawson. Maybe just in the middle stages of the season, not staging, whatever that means, but this season it was a very good it was a solid season for him. Definitely the second best driver of the Red Bull stable, as we'll probably get onto later.
I think we were all quite surprised that he did better than Lawson when he came in, and why it's even more surprising, I think, when he was not given the Red Bull seat. But yeah, I think he's surpassed Lawson when he came in originally.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I am quite surprised myself. I was expecting Tsunoda to be promoted, but I guess Red Bull don't have some sort of reservations that maybe we don't know about. 12th place, I've given Alex Albon. I think it's even though he was fast and he led the team well, I just think the crashes at the end of the season just really put him down. And even when something like when he had to take over when he took over Sargent's car, due to as they couldn't rebuild Sargent's car when he crashed. I can't remember where it was. And yeah, I think it was nowhere near as good as last season. But then again, last season was, I think, probably his best season in F1 that he'll probably have. The Williams was also not as competitive this year as well, probably a lot of the time, so that didn't exactly help. 13th, bit interesting one. I have gone for Valtteri Bottas. I know he didn't finish the season with any points, But then again, I think there were a few occasions even early on in the season when he could have scored points. Especially, I'm thinking China, if it wasn't for pit stop errors and an engine problem. So it was not. I think this year he has just been genuinely unlucky. The fact that he escaped Q1 10 times as well with that car is very respectable. So I just think if this is his last season in F1, he can go out with his head held high.
Interesting that both of you. Sorry, interesting if you don't mind just saying. Interesting that both of you have put Bottas ahead of Zhou Guanyu. I thought that Zhou Guanyu would have had a better shout, given that he was the only one who scored points. But you do make the point that he got out of Q1 with that car quite a bit. And maybe he was quite unlucky. God,
Yeah.
look, it's casting my mind back to the start of the season where if the Saubers got a pit stop that was less than 5 seconds, it was celebration, hats held high, because it was so bad the pit stops earlier on. And even though they have made improvements, I think throughout the season slightly, which is maybe why Joe was able to get those points later on in the season. I think it's maybe difficult to judge because of how poor the car was.
Yeah, I think it was genuine to do consistency that Bottas is, I think, significantly better than Zhou Guanyu. But yeah, so I'll just quickly finish my 14th and 15th. So 14th, I have put Esteban Ocon, just because he was decent in the first half of the season, picking up points in places like Miami, Canada, and Spain. And obviously that good 9th place in Belgium and the podium in Brazil. But I just feel the amount he complained about that car in the second of the season, where Gasly completely outclassed him every single perceivable stat pretty much, and Ocon was just perceived he had car problems and the team just couldn't detect problems. And I just felt he was thoroughly underwhelming that second half of that season. I feel like, I don't know, it might just be biasness, but I've just seen Ocon put up more excuses than results sometimes. All due respect, but I just didn't feel like he was good enough this season, especially when the car properly became competitive. Gasly took advantage, Ocon did not. And 15th place is got to be good old Mag. He had a very good late season run, but again, it's just the consistency that puts him well below his teammate. I think, obviously, we will miss Magnussen for his, let's just say, on-track antics, we shall call them.
On-track and off-track antics, personally. I think it was just, he's a very fun driver to be around, but maybe when you're trying to run a team, it's not having someone who's that frantic and inconsistent. But yeah, very good point. I also put Ocon up there, because Ocon, for me, is actually in my 11th place, and I think the reason that he's obviously we knew he was lower down than his teammate, but I think Ocon did still kind of have that unpredictability and that anger about him that maybe we were talking about with Kevin Magnussen, and the unpredictability of what you're going to get. I'm thinking of his crash in Monaco for Ocon. I think that for the start of the season he was definitely on par with Gasly, the reason that he's down there is, as Chinmay mentioned, he's not able to take advantage of the good pace in the Alpine come the last stage of the season, unlike Gasly, obviously. 12th, I've gone with Tsunoda. So Tsunoda a little bit behind. He's just below Ocon just because of his, as we mentioned, the middle stages of the season where he wasn't quite good. I don't think this is his best season in the RB. I do think that maybe his season before, or his first season RB, were maybe a little bit better. But he was able to get the better of Ricciardo and Lawson, something I really didn't think was going to be the case. I thought Lawson was going to be a lot better than him. 13th was Kevin Magnussen. Again, just the inconsistency. He is above Albon and the two Saubers just because he has been able to deliver some really good performances at times, but he, as we mentioned, just needs to clear up the penalties. And Albon was in 14th for me. I think this has been a really underwhelming season for him. Partly, I want to say that because we know how good he can be, and I think a lot of people were disappointed in him for that, because we know he's I think if anything, overperformed in that Williams. for the past 2 seasons, and he's been phenomenal. This season really wasn't that great, but then we should also take into account that the Williams was very terrible. And 15th, so I've actually put Zhou Guanyu ahead of Valtteri Bottas, unlike you two. And I think, I don't know, I really struggled to differentiate between the Saubers, as I've already mentioned, because the car was so bad. I'm just going to put Zhou Guanyu because of the points. And I think he did put in some, even though Valtteri Bottas was maybe slightly more consistent, I think Zhou Guanyu just did have a few standout performances that I think really surprised all of us with that he was capable of delivering that, and hence that's the reason why he's been able to get the points and Bottas hasn't purely. I realise that we've all chosen very similar for our 16th, 17th, and 18th. Obviously, it doesn't go down to 20 because we're only including drivers that have completed the large majority of the season. So we're not including drivers like Colapinto, like Lawson, like Ricciardo. And so we've each gone with a Sauber. For me, it will be Valtteri Bottas. For you guys, it will be Zhou Guanyu. And unsurprisingly, we've gone with Stroll and Perez in the bottom 3. Chinmay, I'll come to you first. I think I can predict what order this is going to be in. I'm going to say, for you, it's going to be Zhou Guanyu, Stroll, and then Perez. Am I right?
You got it the wrong way around.
Really? You put Stroll behind Perez? Oh, I find that very interesting.
For Perez, it's the first quarter of the season.
That is very true.
He was consistent in the beginning of the season. That was one thing. He did bank 103 points in his first 6 races. So
which is quite surprising, judging that he has only 152 overall, which just emphasizes how bad the last stage of the season. But no, you have a good point. It was very good at the start of the season, and I think maybe it's easy to forget that because we've been exposed to just how terrible he was in the last stage of the season. That's obviously what we remember.
Yeah, I almost did put Stroll above him, but that's what it is. Because obviously, the thing is, at the end of the day, that Red Bull, yes, as much as it's the third fastest car, it's not an easy car to drive. Especially because Verstappen likes to set his car up very different to what other people like. So, it's not an easy car to control, ever. It never has been. So, but then again, 103 points in the first 6 and then 49 in the remaining 18 is just insane.
It's so
but then
bad.
Again, and Perez did cost Red Bull the Constructors' Championship. I think it was literally on Perez. I think more than Verstappen. So, yeah, I think
I'm not sure if I'd agree with that, because I mean it's obviously that second driver which is the reason why they weren't able to get up there. But then it's interesting to ask if the effect of another driver would be able to. I'm really not sure. Obviously, Verstappen was always going to bring it for any driver. Verstappen's going to bring in the majority of the points. But yeah, I suppose we'll never know.
I think, but that's the difference between McLaren and Ferrari, because Piastri was able to put out better performances more consistently than Sainz, and Leclerc this season, or more Sainz. I think that's just what it did, because both drivers probably finished higher more consistently than the Ferraris did, which is why they won. Whereas with Red Bull, it's literally has been Verstappen since race 7. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We see the example, I think, of in Azerbaijan when Norris had the poor qualifying, and from that Piastri was up there, and that's exactly what you want from a second driver ultimately for the Constructors' Championship. And so, as you mentioned, that's probably why Red Bull did lose, because they didn't have that second man there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's just what it is at the end of the day. The Constructors is just a combination of the entire team, no matter what. So, the reason, Stroll is below, because I don't think he's had really he hasn't really performed at all this season. And especially the most stupid errors that continues year on year. I think this year, the main one is rear-ending Daniel Ricciardo in China and the safety car restart, and then the infamous gravel incident in Brazil on the formation lap.
That was terrible. That was genuinely
I'm sorry,
awful.
but you got a flipping road to go around as well, and you decide to cut to the
Watching
ground.
that with Oscar, who's a Lance Stroll fan, was like one of the highlights of my year, I think. And it was, it was not a good moment for Lance Stroll
Yeah.
or Oscar.
No. So, yeah, and the reason why Zhou Guanyu is at the very bottom of the pile is, yes, in the final triple header, he did get those 8th place in Qatar. But I think that's the only weekend where he's genuinely pretty much performed the whole year. I think, yes, Valtteri Bottas may have got the preference with the car upgrades, but even then, when they had the same car spec, Bottas was so much quicker. He only escaped Q1 4 times compared to Bottas as 10, and I think he's just been nowhere this season. I think it's just, I know the car is awful, but we're not putting Sargent in this list, so someone's got to be last.
Oh, so you've actually put Zhou Guanyu at the very bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, you put Stroll. I see. Okay. Yeah, I think I can kind of see that. I did put personally for me, I did put well, obviously I put both Saubers above Stroll and Perez, and I think that's just because, as I've mentioned, the Sauber car was so bad. So you wouldn't really expect them to do anything. So if they actually do anything, then that's a result, and that's a good thing. That Sauber car has generally been so terrible, like esque to the probably like 2019 Williams or 2020 Williams, like genuinely awful and nowhere near any of the cars in front of them. I did put Bottas in 16th. I do understand that he has been better than Zhou Guanyu on some levels. We mentioned qualifying, but I really think you could interchange those two. I did just put Zhou Guanyu because of some of those standout performances, like, as we mentioned, Qatar, like China as well. Excuse me. I've then personally gone for, so that's my 16th place is Bottas. 17th, I've gone with Stroll. I've only put him above Perez because a bit like what I've done with the Sauber cars, where Stroll, the car isn't there and the Aston Martin really wasn't there. That doesn't obviously excuse the terrible mistakes that he made throughout the season. We've already mentioned some of them. The main one I can think of being the gravel trap incident. That was really, like, you think that was, you wouldn't expect that from a rookie driver, let alone someone who's one of the most experienced drivers on the grid, we should mention. He's been in since what, like 2017, I think, something like that. So a good few years, and it's just been a really poor season for him. And I do hope it improves, because I don't like to see any driver put in performances or making mistakes as bad as that. But yeah, it was a golf compared to him and Alonso. And I put Perez. Yes, he did have a promising start to the season, but I've just put him below because obviously he's in a Red Bull car, and even though the Red Bull car wasn't the fastest on the grid, it still should be up there. And Perez was consistently going out of Q1. He was consistently making mistakes. The one time that he did have one time later on the season, obviously Azerbaijan, but then he crashed with Carlos Sainz. Argument as to whose fault it was, maybe a racing incident, but yeah, he was just terribly poor. I had to put him in 18th because I said he was the worst driver in our most recent episode of the 2024 review, and so I got to remain consistent, but I do think he is an 18th. So James, just finally for you, let's go through your 16th, 17th, and 18th. So you have the same three drivers as Chinmay, I think Zhou Guanyu, Stroll, and Perez. What order have you gone for?
I found it quite hard to pick between these three, actually.
They've all been equally as bad.
Yeah, for 16th, I actually put Perez. I don't put him last because if you took out the first quarter of the season, he'd definitely be last. But same time, there were some good performances at the start of the season. I mean, the 3 second place in the first 4 races. And Japan, he was just 7,000ths off Verstappen's pole lap in Japan, a track we think as being very driver focused. It's not easy being Verstappen's teammate. We saw how Gasly and Albon struggled. It's really not easy. And Perez did put in a few decent performances after the summer break as well. I mean, Zandvoort and Monza, he wasn't that far off Verstappen. Then Baku, he was beating Verstappen all weekend until that collision, which I think was probably more Sainz's fault, took him out. Otherwise, he would have been on the podium. So, but apart from that, most of the season was pretty bad. I mean, to be come 8th in the World Championship when your teammate wins it, but wins it comfortably, is really not good. The fact that Verstappen won the Drivers' Championship with 2 races to go, yet there was a last race constructors battle between 2 teams, neither of whom were Red Bull, shows how much Perez cost them. He was down at 8th in the drivers. He scored just over the final third of the season, the final 8 races, he scored just 9 points. Verstappen got 15 times as many. The gap between Verstappen and Perez in terms of points was bigger than the gap between every other 2 teammates on the grid combined.
I remember hearing it's the biggest gap since, I think, a team that Jos Verstappen was in, but he was actually, he didn't even compete for the whole season. That was 30 or so years ago, even more than that. So it was absolutely dreadful to see the gap. Obviously, that's emphasised by how good Verstappen was, but still, it's terrible to work with.
Yeah. Number 17, I've gone for Joe Guanyu. He did not have a good season. There was the odd good performance like Qatar. Scoring points in Qatar was good. He beat Bottas a few times, but overall he was pretty poor. Qualifying dead last 8 races in a row is really not good. The sound was bad, but it wasn't like last by miles all the time. I mean, it was obviously difficult to score points in the midfield this year, and it was the slowest car, undoubtedly. But being last like 8 races in a row, just too anonymous. 18th, I've gone for Stroll. Again, he just had a really anonymous season. I mean, he never really did much. I can't think of what he. But particularly over the last 2 thirds of the season, he was annihilated by Alonso. He hasn't scored a point since Hungary. It's actually the longest pointless streak of his entire career. And he's had some pretty bad cars, and Williams, for example. And it's actually the longest pointless streak of his career. And then those terrible errors in like China and Brazil. It was just a really anonymous season. The bet highlight was that 6th place in Australia, but even that only came after Alonso got that controversial penalty. And a few DNFs ahead. So just a really anonymous season. He doesn't really deserve to be in that car, particularly with the team thinking the likes of Adrian Newey and works deal with Honda for 26. And yet he's got 1 seat there, so he'll be permanently, and that really doesn't seem right, just because his father owns the team. I don't get how that's allowed. I mean, it seems bizarre, really, the idea that, when you think about it, that you can have, that is actually allowed for him to have a seat because his father owns the team.
I think it's quite interesting. I mean, obviously his father owns the team, but then the sponsors must be getting tired at this point. I think with how poor his performances has been, he must be under so much stress.
Lawrence Stroll isn't the sole owner of Aston Martin. He was the leader of a consortium who bought it. But I did look up the consortium, and most of the other people in it were like Stroll's business partners, I think. It's
going to be interesting because he's secured for next year, and you've surely got to think that if he continues that next season, then people are going to start getting impatient in that team. It's a really strange situation, and it's just become sort of a meme now that he has a permanent seat in F1. But he really doesn't. We mentioned, it's rude to say that he really doesn't deserve to be in there. And you've got to think that if it was any other situation, if his dad didn't have a huge stake in the team, then the situation would be far different, surely.
Yeah, I mean, he wouldn't be in F1 anymore. He might have had a brief. He might have been. Maybe times when he's good. He might have got to F1 otherwise. That's money. He might have, but I don't see would it be more than a few seasons before being out the door.
No,
he's still going to be there in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, still driving his father's team.
Maybe, who knows? I suppose we'll have to see how that gets on. See if Lance Stroll, we're talking about this in 10 years. Well, I don't think I'll be on this podcast in 10 years' time, but Lance Stroll still might be in F1. But we're going to have to see how that gets on next year in 2025. So that has been our 2024 driver rankings. Thank you so much, guys, for coming on, Chinmay and James. I think it was really brilliant to see how our lists compare. We had some roughly the same orders, but we had some really good variation in there as well. If you wanted to find out more about what we thought of the 2024 season, then we have recently released our 2024 season review, going through not only some of the best and worst drivers, but also some of our favourite races, some of our favourite moments. That was a really good episode that I did with Catch and Will Kingswood as well, so make sure to check that out after this episode. And also make sure to tune in for just over a week's time, because now that with the announcement that Lawson is going to Red Bull and Hajar going to RB, we have a completed 2025 grid, and so we're going to be doing a review of how that 2025 grid came about, all the details that happened over the 2024 season of the driver changes, and just reviewing that overall as well. So make sure to tune in that for next week. But until then, thank you very much, James and Chinmay, for joining me. I've been your host, Callum, and until next time, goodbye.